Hello, I'm Lila Hertz, co-chair of the Atlanta National Campaign Council, and I'm thrilled that you all are joining us for tonight's webinar. I don't know about you, but I felt like dancing with that pre-webinar music. Just a note, if you have any questions, please enter them in Zoom's chat function. To kick things off, I would like to introduce our moderator, Tim Pryor. Tim is an MD PhD student who joined Tulane's Physician Scientist program in 2015. He currently works in Dr. James McLaughlin's lab within Tulane School of Medicine, and I, for one, am so excited to hear about his experience working throughout the pandemic. Tim?
Hi, everyone. As Lila said, my name is Tim Pryor, and I'm very excited to moderate tonight's webinar. I'm originally from Westport, Connecticut, and got my undergraduate degree from Washington University in St. Louis. Before coming to Tulane, I spent 2 years conducting research at Massachusetts General Hospital. As a researcher in Dr. McLaughlin's lab, I research how different adjuvants affect vaccine-specific B-cell activation and migration. In short, I study ways to help vaccines work better by creating a stronger immune response. During the pandemic, I learned how important it is to be flexible with research and able to take what you know and apply it to a new concept. While I have always known that it's important to take my work from bench to bedside, I now have a better idea of how exactly vaccine development works and how approval is processed. But enough about me. Now I would like to introduce Katie Kirkpatrick. Katie is the president and CEO of the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce and is constantly working to address all aspects of COVID-19 as it affects the Atlanta community. Go ahead, Katie.
Thanks, Tim, and good evening. And thank you all for having me. And many thanks to Doug and Lila Hertz as well. I think importantly, from the perspective of a business organization, recognizing that in order to restore consumer confidence and get our economy back on track, it rests on vaccine distribution, as well as the tactics that everyone knows: washing your hands, wearing your mask, and watching your distance. The two coupled together will ultimately get our economies back on track and back to what the new normal will be. And so we have been focused pretty heavily since the end of December on getting vaccines distributed as we could as private entities in support of the Department of Public Health here in the state of Georgia. And I think importantly, and none of you will be surprised when I say this, that it requires a strong collaboration between the private sector, healthcare delivery personnel, and our public health officials. And we have seen some good examples of where this collaboration exists. So for instance, Mercedes-Benz Stadium has been a mass vaccination site where close to 20,000 doses have been administered as of, I think, yesterday. But what's interesting is, one, they've learned to troubleshoot the process and have become more efficient as they move through it, but they're also at about a third of their capacity. And that is largely driven by supply or lack thereof. So you'll hear me reference that quite often. Another good example of a public-private partnership outside of Georgia is in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the governor's office, the Department of Health and Human Services, Atrium Health, the city and county and Charlotte, Tepper Sports and Entertainment all partnered together for very large weekend mass vaccination strategies. They utilized the Charlotte Motor Speedway. They also used the Bank of America Stadium. And they opened the sites to anyone that met their criteria, the 65 and older, et cetera. They did 40,000 vaccines over 2 weekends, so roughly 9,000 per day. And what was really interesting was the data that came out. It was 1 shot per 10 minutes, which doesn't feel very efficient. And then it was reduced to 30 seconds per patient. So basically they were putting a shot in an arm every 4 seconds. And interesting, as I think we're starting to see the data emerge around equity and vaccine distribution, we know from that example that they were able to reach and get the participation up to 30% of the patients that came through those max vaccination sites were from communities of color and the targeted outreach areas that they focused on. So equity remains a challenge and will be throughout the whole vaccination effort. One other example that was actually local, hyper-local, was down on the coast here in Georgia. Gulfstream partnered with the Coastal Department of Public Health to be additive to their efforts. So basically had a designated supply that they were given by the Coastal Department of Public Health. And they hired their own nursing staff. They hired, they paid for everything, the logistics, and they were able to triple the throughput that the Department of Public Health was able to accomplish. So we can see that that public-private partnership is efficient and effective, but remains limited based on supply. And so, of course, I think, we all have seen, and I think Pfizer has indicated they can speed up their vaccine creation, but it's still not going to be enough until more vaccines come online. We certainly have issues with distribution, communications infrastructure, and staffing. And so just a few thoughts on those. As it relates to supply, here in Georgia, roughly 70% of the first shot supply, I hope that made sense, has been put in arms. And then roughly about 10 to 15% have received that second shot. And then we do know, as all states are, they're seeing an increase over the next several weeks in their supply. I think Georgia is seeing somewhere around 20,000 additional doses coming into the state on a weekly basis. And so just one note, I have parents that are over the age of 75, and, thinking about how hard it was for them to get their first and second shots in the last 8 weeks, certainly brought it home to roost for me just on a personal level. But importantly, and I know the state would tell you this too, that the vaccine supply continues to remain unstable and inconsistent. So they don't know on a daily basis or a weekly basis what that supply will look like coming into the state. So on distribution, I think the key issue here that the state is grappling with, and I know the governor just spoke to this, is the equity piece. And how do we make sure that the vaccine is available for all? And so I know there's some planning underway, but I'm going to be very direct and honest. This isn't unique to Georgia. Every state, every municipality is dealing with this issue of equity and how to convince the vaccine hesitant community to take the vaccine, and then how to reach them with the necessary messaging in the right way. So another example here of a public-private partnership thinking about the equity piece is Delta and Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. So Delta this week launched a vaccine program on Concourse C that will not only vaccinate, again, 65 and older employees of Delta, but anyone that is working in the airport complex and the community that surrounds that area, which is has a high population of people of color. So one other note on infrastructure is the piece around engagement rates. And so this is where a communication strategy must be created for unique communities. And we really need to base that on market research. And again, I think this issue we are behind the 8 ball on. And it is where I believe the private community can lean into this and help our public institutions tackle this issue. And the one point I would say here too is that it has to be immediate, it needs to be sustained, and it has to be consistent. And so reaching the underserved populations is an imperative if we're ever going to reach that goal of 80% or higher at that vaccination rate. One last piece is on staffing. And of course, I think this is important from a Tulane perspective as well. If you talk to any hospital administrator right now, the competition for staff is high and there's a lot of poaching going on. And so if we are going to be putting shots in arms, we're going to have to be creative about how we staff for those efforts. I even saw that the Academy of Pediatrics came out and said, hey, we do this on, hundreds of times a day, find a way for us to help out. But this to me is one of those obstacles that we're going to have to overcome, especially when we get more vaccines into the marketplace. So again, collaboration between the public and private sector is going to be important here. Interestingly, I did want to share with you all, since Georgia and Atlanta is home to the CDC, that recently the CDC Foundation, the Task Force for Global Health, the Global Health Crisis Coordination Center, and many private sector partners are all working to support the development of that critical messaging with the right voice, targeted at the right community to reduce that vaccine hesitancy. And I believe that Grady Healthcare is also part of that effort. And so I do want to do a shout out, just because I am speaking with Tulane, that GHC3, or the Global Health Crisis Coordination Center, which is a division of the Center for Global Health Innovation, Georgia Bio CEO Maria Thacker, and I never can say her last name correctly, Gaith, I think is how you say it, completed her public health degree at Tulane. And she also serves on our board of advisors at the chamber. So quick shout out to Maria. And then of course, third-party support. And we saw this when we were working through the testing and ramping up testing and accessibility there, that the philanthropic community and our nonprofit partners are going to equally be as important in administering the vaccine to all parts of the community. And those are things like pop-up centers, leveraging your community centers, your houses of worship, a number of avenues, quite honestly, that were kind of paved out in the testing process, but can be used similarly for a vaccine distribution. And there's my dog. We had to have that during this. And don't forget food banks either. I am so sorry. So let's, again, focus on communication is important. And here's another piece that I think we've all seen pop up in the news lately too, is that if we're dealing with individuals that are over 65, they may not necessarily have access to the right technology to log into a website, get onto a waiting list. And so I know there's been a lot of effort to increase the non-technology options by which to get on a wait list or register for a slot for a vaccine. And again, this is a place where the business community or private community can lean in. My last point here on vaccines is that is certainly what I view as the most important step forward to getting the economy back working fully. But I think very importantly, and given that a number of our hospital systems are part of the chamber, that until we reach that point in time where the virus is under control, that therapeutics are equally as important to combating the virus. We need to do all we can to diminish the strain on our hospital systems as well as our healthcare workers. And so recently was able to have a conversation with Dr. Janet Woodcock, who leads therapeutics for Operation Warp Speed. And she was sharing with us that there are a number of stages of the illness where there are targeted therapeutics that are continuing to be developed and brought online that are important for reducing hospitalizations and ultimately deaths. And so I just wanted to make a clear call on the therapeutic side as well, that that's an important opportunity for public and private to work together. So Tim, I hope that was helpful for everyone, and I'm happy to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Katie. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lisa Morici. Dr. Morici is an associate professor of microbiology and immunology. She has been on the front lines of COVID-19 vaccine research and development since the beginning of the pandemic, and I can't wait to hear her perspective about the vaccine rollout at Tulane. Lisa, take it away.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all. As Tim mentioned, I'm an associate professor of microbiology and immunology at Tulane University School of Medicine. And so I've had the opportunity to witness the response of Tulane University from the hospital side to the faculty, my colleagues here at Tulane University, in terms of the research that we've conducted over the past year and continue to conduct in terms of COVID-19 research, and also the response of our students and the contributions that our students have made, in particular our medical students and our graduate students, because that's who I'm most familiar with, and that's who I interact with every day. And so it's really been an amazing year. Looking back, if we go back, really to when the pandemic started here in New Orleans, Tulane was at the front lines. Our hospitals were quickly, sort of overwhelmed with patients, and it was really all hands on deck. And our trainees, our students, our residents were a part of that. It was incredible. And many of you might have heard about the lack of personal protective equipment and PPE for our nurses and our doctors across the nation. And so, of course, that happened at Tulane Hospital as well. And one of the things that the Tulane School of Medicine and the School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine really started initially was to ask all of the research labs, those of us who work with infectious agents and who conduct research, was to basically donate all of our supplies, all of our PPE, all of our gloves, protective gear, anything that we had in our laboratories, if we could please just donate it to the hospital. And it was a tremendous effort, and it made me proud to see that. And everyone did that. And so our research actually shut down for a few weeks until we could replenish our supplies, but we felt like it was most important to help protect our colleagues, in the hospital, who were risking their lives to treat patients and save patients. And so that was our sort of our introduction to the disease. And then once we were able to start performing research, we had a number of exciting developments. First of all, most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with our Tulane National Primate Research Center, which is an absolute amazing resource. And they were really instrumental in helping get animal models developed very quickly in terms of monkey models that could be used to screen vaccines and therapeutics. They were also instrumental in establishing sterilization techniques so that we could recycle personal protective equipment, and they were able to share those protocols with our hospitals, not only at Tulane, but across the nation. And recently, our Tulane National Primate Research Center has been selected by the National Institutes of Health to lead all of the national primate centers, which there are 7 NIH federally funded primate centers across the nation. And Tulane was selected as the lead center to basically establish protocols and procedures for evaluating not only vaccines, but you just heard Katie talk about the need for therapeutics, to really prioritize as well therapeutic testing in the models that we have in our monkeys at the Primate Center. And so, we're really proud of that role that Tulane is playing. And I can tell you, speaking for my colleagues and students and staff and veterinarians at the Tulane National Primate Research Center, those guys have been working 24/7 for a year. And my hat goes off to them. They've done a phenomenal job and have made a real difference. Just to give you a little bit of highlights about some of the research happening here at the School of Medicine, we've had a number of FAST grants awarded. So the FAST grants were basically advertised by the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. And the idea behind them was to fund COVID research very quickly. And so these were grant applications that were submitted very rapidly and then funded within 48 hours to 2 weeks of submission. And normally it takes months, if not a year, to get a grant funded. And so these FAST grants were really instrumental to sort of help get people off the ground in terms of COVID research here at Tulane. We had a number of investigators at the Primate Center here at the School of Medicine that got grants to do COVID vaccine research as well as therapeutic research. So I was actually, myself and James McLaughlin, who Tim Pryor worked with, we were one of the recipients, and we were funded to develop 2nd generation COVID vaccines, which I can tell you, I hope we won't need, but we have a sort of a niche in vaccine development, and we were able to promote that and get funded so that we could have sort of backup vaccines if they were needed. And so we continue to do that work. We have another investigator in our department here at the School of Medicine, Mari Nover, who was funded to develop and test basically vaccines for unrelated diseases like the BCG vaccine that is a vaccine for tuberculosis, to study whether or not that vaccine can provide some non-specific protection against COVID. And that is significant because there were many clinical trials across the globe that were initiated to look at whether BCG or the MMR vaccine could protect healthcare workers through this non-specific immunological protection against COVID-19. And since we have the animal models here, Dr. Navarre was able to take advantage of that and get funding to actually test experimentally whether those work. And those studies are also ongoing. There's another very interesting study that Dr. Patty Kissinger is conducting, where they're using pop-up tents across the New Orleans and Jefferson Parish communities to look at what the prevalence of COVID is in our population. And so I'm sure many of you are aware, we don't really know what the percentage of immune people are. You know, we think it's about 20% that might have been exposed and have some immunity to COVID before the vaccinations began, but we really don't know. And so Dr. Kissinger has these pop-up tents that are happening, they're unannounced, and so that way you can get a really good representative sampling of the community to get an idea of what the prevalence of basically antibodies, you know, are in the community. And that's, I think, one of 12 sites, or New Orleans was one of 12 cities across the nation where that's being done. And then, you know, there's, Katie mentioned that there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy out there, and there's a lot of, you know, concern about, you know, equitable distribution. And so Tulane is very aware of that. And there's been a real effort on Tulane's part to hold town hall meetings that have been available to our community. And so what we've tried to do with those town halls is to educate the community about the vaccines and about COVID-19. And in particular, there's a program called the LA SEAL, which is the Louisiana Community Engagement Alliance. And that particular program has made a real effort to reach out to, you know, communities of color who are in particular very worried about the vaccine and you know, don't necessarily trust it. And so we've been, I've been involved with that program in trying to help educate and encourage vaccination and an understanding of the vaccine among that community. And then, you know, I would really like to just share with you a little bit about what our students have been doing as well, because they've just been amazing. You know, they've been impacted tremendously during this pandemic, and their education was interrupted. You know, their timeline to graduation for some of our doctoral students, you know, might have been set back by a few months, but they took it like stars, and they really went above and beyond the call of duty in terms of what they did for us. So one of the things that Tulane did is we implemented our own diagnostic testing here at Tulane, which was just incredible because it was able to turn around positive COVID test results, you know, for our doctors. And it was also, you know, helping us now screen our undergraduate students as well as everyone, you know, our staff and our faculty. And we initially had students, you know, the graduate students and the medical students who were trained in these molecular diagnostic techniques, they were volunteering in the labs. And so they were going to their classes or their labs during the day, and then they were volunteering in the labs in the evenings and all night long to get us, you know, to help us get those results. And so that was truly incredible. And more recently, our medical students have been volunteering as vaccine to administer the vaccine in our vaccine clinic here at Tulane. And so that's been, you know, tremendously helpful because we've been able to immunize more people more quickly because we have the medical students volunteering their time to administer those immunizations. And so, you know, I hope that was helpful, and I'm going to hang around and hopefully answer some of your questions about the vaccines that you might have next. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. That was incredibly informative. Thank you so much to both of you for sharing your expertise with us. Now I'd like to open up for questions. So if you have any questions for Katie and Dr. Morici, please put them in the chat. We also have the Atlanta National Campaign co-chairs, Lila Hertz and Mark Tipton, here to answer any additional questions or maybe ask some of their own. So to start us off, I have a couple pre-submitted questions while we wait for questions to show up in the chat. So how soon can we expect to see vaccinations across the general public?
Katie, do you want to start with Georgia? And I could.
Sure. Yeah, to be honest, I think that's difficult to predict at the moment. It's going to be dependent upon, additional vaccines coming on. Is it a single shot? Is it a double shot? What are those storage and delivery requirements? And so I think the timing of that's going to be as important in determining how quickly that rollout will advance. I think the other piece that I would share that public health officials as well as our state leadership are grappling with is as supply increases, and again, it may not necessarily increase at a steady rate, how and when do you increase the participant list as that supply does increase? And so, if you jump directly from 65 to 55, right, they're going to have to look at the state data to look at that population base to understand how many people are in that category. And if it's more than meets the supply, we're going to be back to where we were at the beginning of January, which is a very constrained system. And so I think I keep telling you all the challenges, but these are the real challenges that we have to solve for. And then or is it based on the essential worker? Are they the next round? So are teachers first or is it a grocery store worker? And so I think those questions are going to be incumbent as well when we're thinking about how this rollout goes. It's going to be the supply side question, but it's also going to be how do you broaden the participant list in a way that matches supply?
Yeah, Katie's absolutely right about everything she just said, and I'll just briefly touch on the supply issue. Katie's right that's been the limiting factor, and when the Johnson & Johnson, we're very hopeful that vaccine is going to get emergency use authorization in the next week, hopefully. That's going to help a lot because that manufacturing base and capability is already established. And it is a single dose vaccine. And so each vial is going to go twice as far. And so that's going to help a lot. But as Katie mentioned, there are a lot of ethical and technical considerations that will have to be, solved.
Thank you for that response. I think this question is a little bit more directed for Katie, but is Stacey Abrams involved in vaccination distribution planning?
I'm curious who asked that question. I don't think so, not in the state of Georgia. No, our leadership is still a Republican leadership model. So I would be surprised if Stacey is involved. I tell you who should be involved, Chick-fil-A.
Thank you. Okay, should people on immunosuppressive meds take the current vaccine?
So I don't like to give individual advice to any one person, because I don't know what that immunosuppressive condition is. What I can tell you is that all of the vaccines were tested in people with all sorts of comorbidities and underlying conditions, and they appear in the clinical trials. They appeared equally effective in everyone. And so I would encourage you, if you're concerned, to speak with your personal physician about the vaccine, based on what your underlying condition is. But we haven't seen any reason, necessarily to suggest that these vaccines won't work because you have a particular underlying condition.
Thank you. Will vaccine research continue even after the pandemic is over?
COVID vaccine research or vaccine research in general?
I'm going to interpret it as probably COVID vaccine.
I think this is a bigger question, and it's really, will SARS-CoV-2 virus be with us forever? And are we going to have to think about annual vaccinations or routine vaccinations? And I think we're starting to think that's going to be the case. There's been a lot in the news recently about the variants, and it seems like, this particular virus is going to mutate. We're hoping it doesn't mutate super rapidly, but it's probably going to mutate. And we're probably going to, at some point, need booster shots, whether it's a slightly different version of the vaccine that we're receiving now. But there probably will be booster doses. And, it's possible that over time, the SARS-CoV-2 virus will sort of, weaken and become more like a common cold coronavirus that circulates in the population already. And that, take some time for that to happen. But we're hoping that it doesn't quite mutate as quickly as flu. And then, as you all know, we need a flu vaccine every year because flu changes so rapidly. So it's possible that, we're going to find somewhere of a middle ground with the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
Thank you. I think this question is more for Katie. What things are being done to help at-risk populations overcome basic issues like transportation?
People don't talk about this issue quite as much as they should. I think we talk a lot about the hesitancy issue, but the reality is that most of our underserved population have other hurdles to actually reaching a vaccine, and transportation is one of them. And so I know that some of our philanthropic partners in the community are looking at this specific issue. How do we transport? And it's actually a two-way question. One, how do we move people to where the vaccine is? And I think the second question is, how do we take the vaccine and take it to where they are? So I know there is some conversation around mobile vaccine units so that we can take them into the neighborhoods that may be disconnected from the public health system. And then looking at how to either provide supports for or even just pay for transportation to a mass vaccination site. It's an important piece of this puzzle. And if we think about any access to any kind of service by the underserved population, there's going to have to be wraparound support. So I would tell you the philanthropic community right now, I know this is top of mind, and working with our public health system to answer that.
Thank you. So part of the vaccine hesitancy is from women of childbearing years. People really want to know if it's safe for that population to receive the vaccine.
Yeah, so, there's been a lot of misinformation that's being spread on social media and Facebook. Some of the things that I've seen and heard are that the vaccines are going to make women infertile. And I can tell you right now that, there's absolutely no scientific evidence for that. That is basically just, myth that's being spread around on social media. In fact, there were multiple women who became pregnant during the Pfizer clinical trial. And so, again, these vaccines are approved for people 18 years and older. And if you're pregnant, I would encourage you to speak with your healthcare provider and talk with them and let them, tell you what they know and don't know about the particular vaccine that you're being offered, so that you can make an informed decision as to, whether you want to receive the vaccine or not. The CDC has said that, women who are pregnant should be offered the vaccine, but it's a personal decision for each woman.
Thank you. Someone is wondering, is there conclusive data on whether vaccinated individuals can still spread COVID-19?
Yeah, so that's the question we're all waiting, to see, what these vaccines are going to do. So there's some encouraging evidence for AstraZeneca's vaccine out of the UK, where they were looking at nasal swabs of individuals and following them after the first dose of vaccine, and it looks like there was a 67% reduction in positive nasal swabs in vaccinated individuals who received 1 dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine. That's very encouraging because if you don't have virus detectable in your nose, you can't transmit it. And so that would imply that the vaccine would block transmission, at least to a certain extent after the first dose. And if that applies to that, that's the case with the AstraZeneca vaccine. The data is still early, but we're very hopeful that, the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines that have even higher efficacy rates will be able to do so as well. So we're very hopeful that it's sort of leaning in that direction, that we're going to be able to stop transmission as well. But we have to wait and see what the variants do as well. They might throw us a curveball a little bit on that.
Thank you. I think this question is more for Katie, but do you think businesses will mandate vaccinations for workforces?
I think legally at the moment they can't, because you can't legally mandate a emergency use vaccine for a worker to take. I think once you get into where it's a fully approved vaccine, I do think segments of our segments of industries, et cetera, will look at that from a workplace safety perspective, especially if they have forward-facing or customer-facing positions, maybe in the healthcare space. But my one caution there is I don't think it will be done on a knee-jerk reaction. They're going to certainly listen to their employees and understand their engagement in this. And then they're certainly also going to listen to the legal scholars as well. But it's actually not uncommon to require vaccines. I know that many companies require folks to have the flu vaccine. So it's going to be a matter of timing, I think. And there's so much unknown here too, right? To what Lisa was just speaking to, transmission and, what percentage of your workforce is vaccinated and not. And so I think there's a number of considerations, but the short answer is I do expect that we will see some segment of the business community mandate it. I just am not sure that it will be a high percentage. Tim, one last point there. What you may actually see is incentivizing more than mandates. So you will see, you get a day off, you get an extra, $100. So I think you will see that happen before you will see mandates.
Thank you. Are the second generation vaccines for the variants, or are they being developed for future years or mutations?
So I'm guessing that the question is referring to the second generation vaccines that I mentioned we were working on here at Tulane. And initially, that was intended to be second generation vaccines for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, whatever form that virus takes on. And it was because we were concerned that the initial vaccines, the mRNA vaccines in particular, and the adenovirus vaccines, that they would not be transmission blocking, that they would probably prevent severe disease in the lung and maybe death, but not clear the virus from the upper respiratory tract. And so our focus was to actually target immunity to the upper respiratory tract so that we could eliminate the virus and eliminate transmission. But as I said, it looks like these vaccines are going to be pretty good at doing that. And so I'm a vaccinologist. I develop vaccines, but I'm really blown away with the mRNA vaccines and the adenovirus vaccines. They're really exceeding expectations. If you guys remember, the FDA had initially said, we're just hoping for 50% efficacy. All of these vaccines are blowing that out of the water. And that's with the variants. We're even with some of the more difficult variants. For example, in South Africa, the Johnson & Johnson phase 3 trial, is showing, a sort of reduced efficacy, but still protecting against severe disease and hospitalization and death. So all of these vaccines are going to be very good at saving lives and helping us get to herd immunity.
Thank you. So this question is more of a public policy question, but at what point do we assume that the non-vaccinated population of the tier that is currently being vaccinated is by choice? And when do vaccinations move to the next tier of people?
Great question. And Lisa can add on here too, but again, this is, to boil it down, it's a numbers game to some degree. It's, one thing states do know is age and what population is in that age range. And so they can look at supply, they can look at how many folks have been vaccinated, they can, based on surveys, understand the hesitancy rate, and they can kind of make a judgment call on when to widen the participant base. And so I don't think we can point to a time at the moment, but I believe that the public health system will use likely age. This is me, I'm not public health, but I think because that is an area that they have specific information on, they can make a better determination of how to widen it. And so I think that's the best way I can answer that question. I don't know, Lisa, if you have any thoughts there. I wish I could say it's like April 1st, but it's dependent on supply. It's going to be dependent on the vaccinated population. It's going to be dependent on the hesitancy rate. And they will have to make those decisions based on that data.
Yep, Katie nailed it.
Thank you. Okay, so this one is for Katie. Are you familiar with the COVID app Novid that Georgia Tech has been using for months? Do you think that it might be an option for broader use in Georgia? And does Tulane have an app like this?
Can't answer for Tulane, so I'll let someone that is with Tulane answer that, but leave it to Georgia Tech, right? A technology geeky school to figure this out pretty quickly. But it is certainly a bright spot in the community to have a fully functioning higher education system in the middle of right smack in the middle of an urban area, be able to have an extensively low rate of COVID cases is in part to the Novid app. And thanks to the folks that created that. Does it have wider application? I think that is challenging in the general community because on a campus, you have some kind of control in that you can require students to do certain behaviors. If they want to be in the classroom, if they want to visit the cafeteria, I mean, there's just controls and requirements that can be put in place. The general public, it's a little bit different because that control piece is somewhat missing in terms of what local government can actually require or business can require. So I'm not sure the application broadly, but I think they've certainly learned a lot about transmission through the app, and that could certainly be used in a broad public health perspective. I don't know about, I don't know if Tulane is using it.
I'm not fully aware what that particular app does, but Tulane has a COVID self-check app. So we get an alert every morning and we go through the little app and we say, if we've been exposed to anyone or if we have a fever. So it's a daily reminder to be safe. Tim's a student here. Do you have anything to add, Tim?
No, I mean, not anything more than that. Tulane has a pretty extensive dashboard that they use to keep very current with all the cases and infections. And I imagine at some point in time, they may be including vaccination in that as well. We also get, as a student, as a graduate student, we get tested every 2 weeks. And I believe undergrad students are being tested twice a week. And as Lisa mentioned earlier, Tulane is actually running all of our tests in-house. So we tend to get the results back within the same day. So it is actually very nice for keeping on top of any possible spreader events or anything like that. Tulane tends to figure it out pretty quickly, and everyone is being very responsible and going into quarantine once they've been exposed. And I believe we have one final question, and that is, does anyone know what happened to the people who died or had severe side effects shortly after receiving the vaccine? And should that be a concern for others?
Yeah, so these are always interesting questions to ask because the media, loves to report when someone gets a vaccine and then dies a couple hours later or dies, a day later. And I'm sure, people that ate a McDonald's hamburger died a few hours later or died a day later, but the media doesn't report that, right? So vaccines just get attention. And so, in probably all of the circumstances that we're hearing about, it's coincidence. But I can tell you that the post-vaccine monitoring is there is nothing that is looked at as closely as a vaccine in terms of safety. And so there are numerous mechanisms in place to follow the vaccine safety as it's being distributed to the public. The public has a role in that. You can report adverse events through various mechanisms. There's one called vSafe that goes directly to the CDC. And, as of today, there's no evidence that any of these vaccines are causing any serious adverse events. The worst that we're hearing about are these allergic reactions to the mRNA vaccines. They're occurring anywhere between 2 to 6 per 1 million doses given. They're typically happening in people with other allergies, and it's thought to be the polyethylene glycol component in the vaccine that is what's causing the allergic reaction. But it's treatable. No one's died from the allergic reaction, and so the only contraindication for use, for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines is if you have an allergy to polyethylene glycol or any other component in the vaccine. But these vaccines, from a vaccinologist perspective, these are some of the, as far as we can tell up to this point, these are some of the safest vaccines ever developed. And it's because they're delivering the instructions to our cells to make the protein of the virus. There's no live virus that's being injected. There's no inactivated virus that's being injected. It's just instructions for our cells to make a piece of the virus. And so it's incredibly safe, incredibly safe. And while I'm on my safety thing here, let me just say that, in the history of vaccination, most of the vaccines that have caused serious adverse events, those are revealed within 2 months, especially when you're talking about the scale of vaccination that we're witnessing. Tens of millions of people are getting these vaccines. And many months have passed since the beginning of, you look at phase 3 trials where we started enrolling tens of thousands of people. We've had many, many months pass. We're well beyond a 2-month period. And so, these vaccines, they're very safe.
Thank you, Lisa. So it looks like we've got time for one more question. Any questions that we haven't reached, we'll try to do our best to answer after the panel. But the last question is, for either speaker, is there a way to get involved as a volunteer in the Atlanta community? Where is help needed the most from non-medical help?
This is an excellent question. The two thoughts I had is it goes back to what we all focused on, I think, at the beginning of the pandemic, which is our healthcare worker. I would, if you spoke to the hospital administrators, they would tell you they are really deeply concerned about the mental health and the well-being of their employees that have been fighting this virus for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week now for almost 11 months. So if I were looking to volunteer, I might reach out to find ways that I could support the healthcare worker. So that doesn't require a medical background, but that in turn is helping someone that is treating or vaccinating someone. And I think the second piece is only because I haven't asked this question of our local departments of health, I would reach out to your local Department of Health and see if they have a volunteer list, someone that might be able to run paperwork, someone that could potentially check in, someone to a vaccine site. But I would certainly check with your Department of Public Health. But I care deeply about our healthcare workers, and I would not forget the passion that we all had for them at the beginning of this, and they still need support and indications that we care about what they're giving back to us.
Thank you. So we're just about out of time now, so I want to pass it over to Mark Tipton to wrap things up. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to take a little bit of prerogative here to ask one quick question. So I saw where Dr. Morici just clicked off, but I know Tulane is doing just an amazing job at testing all the students weekly. And we've heard a lot about it, gotten accolades on it. I was wondering if we've done any testing on the students to see around antibodies, to see, how many have been exposed, and compare that, be able to collect that data. Or is that being done, or is that something that, we're just can't do because we're focused on other things?
Yeah, so Tim can jump in here as well. I'm not aware of students specifically being tested, but as I mentioned, Dr. Kissinger just started that pop-up tent around the city, and so that's going to give us a really good idea, a representative, indication of the community, of how many people have antibodies. And our students are doing their best to isolate and not to go out, but I'm guessing that they're probably going to be representative of the community as well. So if we see 20-25% rate of antibodies in the community, my guess is the students have similar.
Thank you. I actually have the best job tonight because it's all about saying thank you. And we also need to keep all the students out of the boot. Is that right, Dr. Morici? I hear that's a part of our objective. And Katie, you probably don't know, the boot is the big right off campus bar that probably is the big COVID spreader of all time. But really, it's all about thank you. Katie, appreciate Katie Kirkpatrick, the CEO and president of the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Thank you for all the good work that y'all are doing, especially as it relates to COVID-19. And thank you for being here. Dr. Morici, you very inspiring to hear the work that you're doing. Makes, I think, all of us proud to be Tulane graduates. You mentioned the Primate Center. I have had the opportunity to take a tour out there. I would encourage anybody to do it because it is like you said, it's a great asset to the university, and especially in times like this. Tim, buddy, there is I think Meet the Press might be giving you a call. I mean, the way you moderated this, I think you maybe have another career choice. But I'll also mention that Tim and Dr. Morici mentioned this, just defended his dissertation a couple of days ago and passed with flying colors. So the PhD put a check by that. Now he's got to spend a couple more years in medical school getting that degree. But Tim, hats off to you. It's very inspiring what you're doing. It makes us, once again, all proud to be affiliated with Tulane. I also just want to thank the Atlanta National Campaign Council for everything they did to help on this event. And of course, my co-chair, Lila Hertz, the brains of this organization here in Atlanta. If you have additional questions too, I've been told to say, let us know about it. Jenna Burt is going to send out her contact information, and she's happy to get back with you. Likewise, I think you'll get all of our information. And then the last thing is thank all of y'all for taking the time to get on this call. I know we've got a lot of demands on our time. Hopefully it's been informative for all of you. I know I've enjoyed it. So, thank you very much. Have a great night. And I don't know if Jenna, are you going to put up one last screen?